Young people have a lot of power. They can shut societies down. They can shut them down. They can block streets. They can engage in direct action. They can educate their parents. They're a potent political force, and I think that what they need to do is to recognize themselves as a potent political force. I think they need to act.
He really is the poster child for the 1960s radical professor, isn't he? What you just heard and the man who said it are the reasons more than half of Texas kids can't read at grade level. You probably believe public school teachers are teaching kids reading, history, science, and math so students can properly function in our society. Well, you're wrong if you think so. There's a different agenda at work in our schools which does the complete opposite of that. And like most of society's ills, it finds its roots in the 1960s.
Fundamental questions about education, ideology, culture, power, authority.
It all starts with critical studies. You've heard of critical race theory, right? CRT? The critical ideology that everything is about race, power, and oppression? Texas took action to boot critical race discussions from our classrooms, but that isn't what's ruining our kids. We need to take the focus off of critical race practice and put it where it will actually make a difference, on teachers and teacher colleges. You see, critical social justice teachers are what's ruining Texas kids and kids across the country. We're fond of saying that schools are failing our kids and then we throw money at the problem. But schools aren't just failing our students. They're ruining the minds of our students, intentionally, by design, far and beyond just critical race issues. Critical race praxis is just the tip of the ideological iceberg in our public schools. Critical gender studies, critical ethnic studies, critical queer studies, criticism of traditional literature, critical historicism, it's endless. And teachers push all of this on our kids under one heading. It has a name. It's called critical pedagogy. Teachers learn it in college, and it was brought to our colleges by 1960s radicals. A quick primer on critical studies. A critical theory or study is simply a criticism of the existing society. Anyone can become a critical studies scholar because no actual scholarship is required. If it required rigor or work, everyone wouldn't be doing it. But it's so easy, even a child can do it. Your kids are probably doing it right now if you're watching this during the school day. Here's how it's done. Choose a facet of society: law, art, gardening, math, bird watching, Charlotte's Web, the Alamo, whatever. Now problematize it by politicizing it, emotionally charging it. Do things seem unfair? Do you think that some people feel bad because of this thing? Nobody actually has to be harmed by the thing. You don't need data or facts to support your claim. Okay, now claim that one group has more power than another group, make a list of grievances, blame them all on systems of power and oppression, cloak it all in unreadable jargon, and bam, you have yourself a critical theory. Congratulations. Now you can build an entire career around your little criticism of society. Get like-minded critical theorists to peer review your paper or book, and you are well on your way to tenure, my friend. The thing you just created out of whole cloth will be cited by future scholars and will become a bona fide part of knowledge. It's as easy as that. You expect such mental gymnastics in universities, but in elementary schools? Oh, it's there. The vector through which the critical studies virus is transmitted from colleges into your kids is teachers. Here's how. Teachers must go to college for a minimum of 4 years plus a teacher prep program in order to take the certification exam in Texas. That gives professors ample time to train our teachers to employ that nifty little trick they call critical pedagogy. As I just explained, you can take a critical studies eye to literally anything. So critical studies are infused throughout universities, from music to English to PE to history. So a degree in almost any major will transmit what they call critical consciousness. Once they become teachers, they bring that critical consciousness to the classroom via critical pedagogy and then foist it onto your kids. Now, critical pedagogy runs about as wide and deep as education itself. But here's what you need to know about it. Pedagogy is just a word that means a method of teaching. The purpose of this particular method of teaching is to turn your kids into little critical theorists, little revolutionaries in the mold of their teachers. It exists to prevent kids from learning to function in society They are trained instead to reject and disrupt it in the name of social justice. Critical teachers prod their emotionally vulnerable students into obsessing over equity and inclusion. Kids learn that the world is systemically rotten to the core, and they are the agents of societal change.
Education in the final analysis is really about the production of agency. What kind of agents are we going to produce?
Teachers in a critical classroom consider themselves partners, equals with the kids, instead of as authority figures imparting knowledge from their heads into the heads of their students. They're partners in a struggle against the oppressive status quo. In these classrooms, obedience is viewed as bad, as oppressive. It creates an icky power dynamic between the educator and the learner. Instead, students, or learners as they're called, should be liberated by the classroom experience. Social justice teachers survey kids about their so-called lived experiences, their home lives, what bothers them about the world. Then they tailor their lessons around the students' various identities.
The most fundamental struggle inherent in education, which is a struggle over identities, a struggle over agency.
They call this culturally responsive teaching. We call it grooming little revolutionaries. The priority in social justice education is to push the kids' emotional buttons to incite them to social action. If kids are happy being kids and don't see themselves as oppressed or othered, they're less likely to engage in activism. And teachers don't want that because they're grooming your kids to be little revolutionaries. Social justice teachers claim to take a holistic approach, educating the whole child, intellectually, socially, and emotionally. They call this social emotional learning, or SEL. We call it grooming little revolutionaries. This method of teaching arrived in our schools by way of a Brazilian philosopher named Paulo Freire. That he viewed Che Guevara as a role model kind of tells you all you need to know about the guy. His writings on critical education went largely ignored until this other guy I keep showing you, professor and 60s radical poster child Henry Giroux, became Freire's biggest cheerleader in the mid-1980s. Together, these two neo-Marxists helped about 100 fellow travelers get tenure in North American universities. Thus, the insidious seeds were planted and the virus spread outward from a few fringe radicals throughout universities and straight into our teacher colleges. Fast forward to today, where the deans and department heads of teacher colleges at UT Austin, U of H, and UNT are all in on radicalizing teachers so they can radicalize your kiddos. The majority of the faculty, well, they're in on it too. It's all out in the open in their faculty bios. They don't mind saying the quiet parts out loud anymore because critical studies isn't the counterculture at Texas universities anymore. It's the only culture. Now, to give you an idea of how truly sick our schools have become, even the most basic tools of human communication, reading and writing, have been politicized by social justice teachers in Texas classrooms. This also has a name. It's called critical literacy. It's the practice of teaching kids to read, and I'm quoting Paulo Freire here, to read the word and the world when looking at a book, a story, an advertisement, even the label on a bottle of water, and asking questions like, who has the power in this story? Why do they have power? How would this story be different if someone of your race or gender wrote it? Does this bottle of water damage the environment? And on it goes. This starts as early as pre-K because you got to start the struggle sessions early if you want the kids ready to protest by middle school. Books for class are chosen by teachers based on the various identities of their kids. Hispanic kids may read news stories about immigration. Kids with same-sex parents may read picture books about sexuality. White kids may have to learn about their privilege. There are kids' books for all of this. Beloved stories with animals as the main characters are frowned upon because animals don't track well to issues of race, gender, sexuality, environmentalism, immigration, the things that these teachers want your kids to think, talk, and write about at school so that they obsess about them outside the classroom. Meanwhile, simple things like spelling, sentence structure, grammar, parts of speech, all that takes a backseat to rooting out injustice and learning to take action.
We have a sphere of influence in our classrooms. We are growing children, as Chris said, we are growing children who are going to become adults in this world. So let's begin there. having kids write about these things, hearing what they have to say, having discussions about what they're saying, and not worrying about it being perfectly formatted and passing tests.
You see? That was Catherine Bomer of UNT's Department of Education. It's more important to get kids writing about racism than it is to be sure they have a full grasp of how to write to begin with.
And it needs to be a holistic approach, not just you come and I'm going to teach you phonics because that's what the district curriculum says I'm supposed to do.
And that's Allie Duffy, PhD from UT Austin, teaches pre-K in Round Rock. And as she said, she won't just teach your kids phonics because the district curriculum says so, but she will teach them how to critique society. Pre-K, folks.
We really wanted to position teachers as the transformative intellectuals that we believe them to be. And additionally, we wanted to highlight the different possibilities for ways in which teachers can balance authentic literacy instruction with increasing standardization while remaining culturally and linguistically responsive to our students.
Transformative intellectuals. Transformative is a pet word of the social justice teachers because it's the actual bedrock of their ideology. Teachers must transform students so students can then transform the world. What this UT PhD candidate and former classroom teacher is telling you here is that teachers have to learn to balance teaching their social justice literacy crap with what's on the actual curriculum. And look, I know it sounds kooky and conspiratorial to just call this outright brainwashing, but the more you hear them speak about it, the less kooky it sounds.
What teachers and teacher educators are actually doing on the ground in front of kids and in front of teachers. They're drawing on their knowledge about reading and reading process, and they're drawing on an ethic around anti-racist pedagogy.
I'll translate. What Beth Malik of UT Austin is saying is that teachers are using what they know about the actual science of reading, how to teach kids to read, and then infusing it with social justice lessons.
When we take up this work, we're most deeply concerned with issues of equity and social justice in teaching. And so we're thinking about how teachers serve the communities, the families, and the children that are entrusted to us.
That was Melissa Wetzel, chair of UT Austin's College of Education. She says when they take up the work of literacy, they're most deeply concerned with issues of equity and social justice. Do you still wonder why Texas kids can't read?
The same thing is true for teaching social action. We need to have had powerful experiences of taking social action, of planning it, organizing it, participating in it, in order to have stuff to say to kids, especially in order to respond to their beginning efforts when the kids are naive and stumbling around and trying to figure out what to do. There's not a kit that's going to tell us how to do that. That's got to be responsive out of our wisdom as adults. We have a responsibility to educate ourselves as citizens so that we can hand it over to our kids.
And finally, Randy Bomer, the dean of UNT's Teacher College. This was filmed in 2004 while Randy was promoting a book he wrote with his wife, Catherine, whom we met earlier. This is their book about teaching kids to read for social action. It was published 2 decades ago, and it's still in print and still selling. And what Randy is telling us here is that teachers themselves need to organize and engage deeply in social action so that they can teach little kids how to do it in the classroom from experience. You can't make this stuff up, folks. Teacher colleges are training teachers to ruin your kids' minds. To give you a crystal clear understanding of how creepy and destructive critical literacy truly is, let's have a lesson from Dr. Lori Ossoff of Texas State University's Teacher College.
So just to sum, critical literacy is not about teaching a method, but a way of thinking and a way of being that challenges text and life as we know it. Critical literacy focuses on issues of power and promotes reflection, transformation, and action. It encourages readers to be active participants in the reading process, to question, to dispute, and to examine power relations.
And now let's listen attentively as Dr. Ossoff tells us precisely how teachers use literacy to groom your kids to be little revolutionaries.
And then we have critical practices. And that's when the reader challenges the dominant perspective by asking questions of the text, asking why things are the way they are, and extending reading to use as a tool for learning about the world, not just learning how to read. In these critical practices and what we're calling critical literacy, we really want to ask whose voice is heard or not heard, who has or doesn't have the power in the story, and how does this text make you feel about social issues and justice? Critical literacy is part of the curriculum and raises issues of social justice that are relevant to students' lives. So it's kind of part of all of the curriculum, but it's the teacher who brings it into the classroom. It is the ability to analyze and question issues of social justice, and it examines the word and the world. So it seeks to empower, to liberate, and to transform. So teachers and students do critical literacy because it becomes a way of thinking.
A way of thinking and being for your kids. Did you get that? If you can find me a better definition of brainwashing, I am all ears. So that's it. 60s radicals dumped this critical crap into our universities, took over our teacher colleges, and turned our teachers into people hell-bent on remaking your kids in their image. It's not just critical race praxis. They want your kids to march in their revolution, a perpetual revolution. You can't have a perpetual revolution without new generations of revolutionaries who imagine oppression everywhere. That is critical pedagogy. College used to be where people became radicalized. Now elementary school is. I think I can demonstrate that for you. Stop and think a minute about the college protests we saw in the last few years. Young adults screaming at the top of their lungs about systemic oppression and injustice, but entirely unable to defend those ideas against the slightest challenge or a hint of fact. Instead, retreating to safe spaces and not the slightest bit ashamed of calling them safe spaces. They demanded the firing of professors who disagreed with them. They threw foul flags over the slightest perceived transgression and babbled incoherently about decolonizing everything. What we witnessed were young adults completely unequipped to function in the world because they're so stuck in the world they were taught ought to exist, they never learned to function in the world that does exist. Do you get it now? Many of those students didn't learn to be perennially offended, entitled, and mentally weak at college. They went to college that way. They entered college as what little revolutionaries inevitably become, dysfunctional, neurotic, semi-literate products of critical pedagogy. So please, can we stop talking about critical race theory and instead take a long, critical look at our colleges of education? I want you to imagine how a student brainwashed in this way will read a Texas history book when he gets to 7th grade. Imagine all the wonderful lessons in literature these kids miss while they're distracted chasing down phantom injustices instead. Grooming kids to be little revolutionaries, preparing them for a lifetime of activism, is not the job of teachers on the state's payroll. They're not paid to turn kids into basket cases looking for oppression around every corner. This grooming robs kids of the fleeting, precious thing they need to keep as long as they can. They're innocent. It completely robs them not just of their education, but of their innocence. We already see the effects of critical pedagogy in Texas, and if we remain distracted by critical race issues and ignore the broader social justice tyranny in our classrooms, we are completely screwed. So what can we do? Well, if your idea of a good time is Texas kids being raised up as tiny 60s radicals and you think you would enjoy watching Texas burn, I recommend you sit on your ass and do nothing. But if you prefer a functioning society where kids can be kids without the interference of social justice ideologues and where parents alone determine what values their kids should hold, I have some ideas. Most importantly, do not send your child or your money to these schools. Yes, you can make more money, but once your kids are lost to you, they're lost forever. Do not write that check. Don't do it. Not for tuition, not for a donation. If you truly want to help out your alma mater, write a letter instead to the chancellor, to the board of regents, and demand they remove the critical pedagogy people from their teacher colleges. UT Austin, U of H, UNT, UTSA, Baylor, and TCU ranked the worst among the schools that we examined. Tell your Texas legislators that they need to act both on teacher colleges and on public schools. Tell them we prefer kids who can read and write to kids who are barely literate enough to make a protest sign. Tell them you want more transparency in public school classrooms. Because remember, this is not in the curriculum. We're currently revamping the curriculum to eliminate critical race praxis, but it's not a curriculum problem. This is a method of teaching that any teacher can waltz into a classroom and employ. I hope you don't hear this as an indictment of all Texas teachers. I know some of you are out there doing your damnedest to help kids learn. If this is something that touches your life directly, let us know. If you're a teacher being pushed into social justice training in your district, get in touch. If you have kids or grandkids being force-fed this at school, please send us an email. Professors and teachers don't have the right to cram their dreams of utopia down the throats of innocent school kids. Grooming kids to be little revolutionaries must and will stop. In the next part of this series, we're going to show you how even the well-meaning teachers I just mentioned are being forced into the diversity, equity, and inclusion cult by none other than the state of Texas. Let's get to work on this, y'all. Everyone needs to be discussing critical literacy and how it damages kids. Stop talking about CRT. That does us no good as long as teachers are creating new critical theorists every damn day to follow in their footsteps. Mamas, don't let your babies grow up to be Marxist. Texas History Trust is taking action, and I hope you'll join us in the fight.